It should be 3 o'clock. Welcome on this beautiful Wednesday afternoon. Welcome to the Gaming in Holland webinar, Essential Services in the Regulated Market. I see some of you now connecting to the webinar. Give it a few seconds until everybody's connected. And again, welcome to the webinar. In today's webinar, suppliers of necessary services will showcase their products and solutions. With us today, we have no fewer than 5 suppliers of essential services, as well as a legal expert to provide some of the necessary regulatory context. There will be a lot to discuss and a lot to take in. However, before we kick off today's webinar, I would like to thank our strategic partners and sponsors. Without their invaluable support, we would not be able to do this. Thank you very much. As always, our webinars are interactive. After each product presentation, there will be time to answer audience questions. If you would like to ask a question, please submit it in the Slido app. In order to do so, please scan the QR code that you see on your screen now. We'll keep it on the screen during the webinar. Or visit slido.com and enter the event code GIH. Next, select the Q&A tab on top of your screen to submit your question. And like this, you can also participate in the polls that we have at the beginning of each speaker. So please take a second, scan this QR code, enter the code GIH in the Slido app, and then you're all with us. We're using this app during the whole webinar, so please take a second for you to participate in this. With us, we have several expert speakers to help us understand some of the products and service related issues that come with launching your product onto the Dutch iGaming market. I would like to introduce Martijn de Boer, founder of ID verification solutions provider, CDDN. Kees-Jan Avis, managing director at corporate compliance service provider, EM Group. Hello, Kees-Jan. We have Irwin, sales manager at ID verification solutions provider, IDNow. Hi, Max. Welcome, Bryan Hill, digital media strategist at the data center solutions provider, Interxion, joining us from the UK. Another person joining us from the UK, last and not least, Antonio Zhangi, CEO of technical compliance solutions provider, Maxima Compliance. Welcome, Antonio. Also with us today is Kester Mekenkamp, gaming lawyer at Kalff Katz Franssen, who is here to help us understand which services are indispensable for a smooth launch into the Dutch market. Kester, welcome. Let's start with you. How do you recommend interested parties should look at the Dutch market, and how do you see the context of the services that the next speakers will address in the webinar? And welcome.
Yeah, thank you, Willem. Our firm has gained quite some experience this first year of licensing, and I mean there are a lot of activities that can be outsourced by licensed applicants and perhaps even should be outsourced. I think I will discuss the main elements we have seen so far that licensed applicants tend to outsource. I cannot tick all the boxes, but I will at least do a couple of very important ones. First thing that springs to mind are the client due diligence obligations, obviously. Elements you can think of are identification and verification of the player identity, also politically exposed persons checks and sanction list checks, but also verification of the contra account, very important. And for payments in general, I would say that applicants tend to engage with PSPs in order to offer certain payment instruments, and they have to bear in mind that they have to submit a payments policy which have to list the different payment instruments and PSPs they are going to use. Now, another financial aspect is the separation of player funds. In essence, this boils down to a mechanism which applicants have to have in place to ensure that at all times player funds can be paid out to the players, even in case of financial difficulty at the license applicant. There are several solutions which can be opted here for. At least one solution will be discussed in this webinar, so please take due note of that. Addiction prevention policy, addiction prevention is a major important thing in the Dutch licensing regime, and applicants have to bear in mind that the addiction prevention policy has to be drafted in cooperation with certain gambling addiction experts. So do that as soon as possible is what we say. Also, a risk analysis has to be performed, a risk analysis of the gambling offer that will be put before the Dutch audience, basically when the operator receives the license. And it's very important to also do that as soon as possible, because both the addiction prevention policy and the advertising policy will have to be aligned to the outcome of the results of the risk analysis. Technical matters, the control database, we have seen that virtually all license applicants are going for a third-party solution here. These will be discussed, I think, also further down in the webinar. And for the game system, we see applicants that rely completely on platform providers, which is possible for the complete game system. Please bear in mind that the complete game system has to be tested and certified before the license application. Very important. Now, to get to the end of this talk, I mean, almost everything basically can be outsourced under the Dutch system, with two major exceptions: the board of directors of the applicant and the internal monitoring compliance officer. Please be aware that the NGA will always have keep the license applicant or the license holder responsible, even though certain activities may be outsourced. And also be aware that even if certain activities are facilitated by other entities within your own corporate group, this is still outsourcing according to the NGA. And certain requirements have to be fulfilled upon the license application. You will have to submit a outsourcing policy. I won't bore you with the details, but it has to be tailored to the Dutch requirements. A declaration has to be given to the NGA by the applicant, indicating that it has a certain that always third parties basically comply with the law. Certain clauses have to be included in your agreements with your suppliers, so take due note of that. And finally, you will have to submit an overview of all the different activities that you have outsourced and the entities to which you have outsourced those activities. So I think that rounds it up. So that's it for me. Back to you, Willem.
Really appreciate it, Kester. That was really helpful. Let's see how some of this translates into practice with some of the next speakers. Again, if you'd like to contact Kester, you can see his contact details here as well. Also, please note that this webinar is recorded. We will share a link to the recording in our next newsletter. This means you can revisit this information whenever you like. And thank you again, Kester, for joining us from NCM. Our first supplier today here is Martijn de Boer, founder of ID verification solutions provider CDDN. Before we let him explain the how and why of the ID verification in the regulated Dutch market, I would like to ask all our viewers, you at home, participants in the webinar, to participate in a brief audience poll. In order to do so, please scan the QR code on your screen or visit slido.com and enter the event code GIH. Next, select the poll tab on the top of the screen in order to submit your response. Our first poll question here is: which percentage of potential customers that start the registration process with an operator fail to complete it? There are several options provided. Please let us know what you think. This gives an interesting backdrop of the questions we're going to ask Martijn. Give it a few more seconds. Again, please, I ask you to look at the Slido app by pointing your camera at the QR code, or go to slido.com and use the event code GIH. Like that, you can participate in the polls as well as the Q&A for the speakers who are at home. Great. I think that gave an interesting backdrop to the first question is to Martijn here. You see what the audience thinks. What do you think is the right answer, Martijn?
Well, first of all, thanks for having me, Willem, and good afternoon all. We indeed conducted a small survey with some of the casino guests, and there was quite some interesting outcomes. Two of the main reasons that people fail to finish the onboarding flow or have this drop-off is the fact that so many steps need to be undertaken. Sometimes it's confusing because all operators use different flows for onboarding. And one of the things that came out is the confusing elements and the steps that need to be taken. Furthermore, there's also the need to ask for BSN, and that's quite unique in the Dutch market, because outside of the government and non-governmental or semi-governmental organizations, the gaming industry is the only branch that needs to verify with the BSN in order to get registered with Crux. That's also seen as a high risk to customers, because they say, okay, I only communicate with my social security number with the government, and why do I need to share my BSN in order to get checked with, in this case, Crux, of course. So there's a lot of hesitation, and of course the many different steps that need to be undertaken.
Great, Martijn. Moving to the second question: how, based on what you just told us, how can the registration process be streamlined to lower the drop-off rate?
Well, we have been following this file for many years, as you know, and we figured out we are kind of reinvented the onboarding flow, so to speak. So we looked at existing solutions that are out there: ID document scanning, IDN, IBAN name check, and such. And we figured out that there are means of, creating shortcuts for the player. And the main thing is that you need to register the player's credentials and personal information as soon and fast as you can. So in our case, over 20 casino operators chose our Verify Me onboarding flow. And say 98% of the cases we are successful. Within 3 minutes, we have people onboarded. And that has mainly to do with the fact that we automate certain steps. So in our case, a user only needs to perform 2 steps in order to get verified. So 2 manual handlings in order to get verified. And the second is that we allow the user to make changes during the registration process. So if he's done an ID document scan, we allow the user to make minor changes to his name or social security number or place of birth, in order to not have to do the scan again for that ID document. And we have several, small, smart solutions for that. And that saves money in the process and speeds up the process.
Very interesting. Thank you very much, Martijn. Before we wrap this up, we have time for one audience question. And we have some questions coming into Slido again. If you would like to ask a question to one of the speakers, please use the Slido app to the Q&A part, the Q&A tab on top of the screen to answer your question. And we have a question here. There's one question for you today here, Martijn. Do you supply KYC tools or solutions that can support our responsible gaming policy? Responsible gaming policy, Martijn.
Yes, we certainly do. And we further improve the responsible gaming policy by adding certain data elements during registration, but also with the aftercare monitoring or continuous monitoring after the registration of information. So we supply several solutions like insolvency check, people that have been placed under guardianship, people that have moved to a different address, people that have deceased. And of course, PEP and sanction list checking, that's a mandatory thing for the RGA. And we also supply that. So in our case, we take care of the data in order to fuel your responsible gaming policy. And furthermore, we provide and enrich socio-demographic features. Things like income, things like property value, is the property rented or owned? What's the family composition? When was the last date that the property was sold? So all these elements are being added to the questionnaire that the player needs to fill in once he wants to enter the casino. For example, what kind of amount and when and how long, etc., etc. And combined with these data elements we provide, they are able to boost their responsible gaming policy. And we are doing that for over 20 casino operators.
Very interesting. And thank you, Martijn, for answering this question. If you would like to know more about CDDN's products and services, you can see on the screen Martijn's contact. And as mentioned before, this webinar is recorded. We'll share a link to the recording in the next newsletter, so you can have a look at this information also at a later stage. Let's move on to the next speaker, and have a nice day, Martijn. Our next speaker is Kees-Jan Avis, Managing Director at Corporate Compliance Service Provider, the EM Group. Welcome, Kees-Jan. How are you?
I'm fine, Willem. Thanks for having me today.
Absolute pleasure. Once again, I would like to ask our viewers to participate in a brief audience poll that has to do with the topic of Kees-Jan's business. In order to do so, please scan the QR code on the left side of the screen, or go to slido.com and enter the event code GIH. I hope we can get some participation going. The poll question here is, do you have an existing relationship with a bank that is allowed to operate as a bank in the Netherlands? And we see some questions coming in here. Again, please join us at the Slido app or slido.com in your browser and participate in the question here about the relationship with a bank that is allowed to operate in the Netherlands. Let's give this a few more seconds, and we see the outcome here is quite clear, Kees-Jan. No. We've seen the response of our audience. Tell us, Kees-Jan, why do you think this outcome is the outcome of this question is significant?
Well, it's significant as in relation to the obligation to organize the separation of player funds. There are a few options provided by the regulator, and two of these options actually require that you cooperate with a bank that is allowed to operate as a bank in the Netherlands. And in the current banking environment and their risk frameworks they apply, it's virtually impossible to establish a new relationship with such a bank in the Netherlands, or a bank that's allowed to operate in the Netherlands. In addition, there are not many banks, once you have an existing relationship, that they are willing to extend to this part of the organization of the operator. And based on that problem that we established, we have launched a product, which is
right?
a solution. Yeah, that's a third-party account foundation, which is a separate Dutch foundation, via which an operator can organize the full separation of player funds in light of the regulatory obligations that are required. Well, we're proud to say that at least 50% of the current licensed operators already make use of this solution in order to separate their player funds.
Exactly. We also announced this product in the previous webinar, so some of the people may be aware of the product. Kees-Jan, how has your product evolved since it was first developed?
A few items have evolved. First, the product itself, and it has been tried and to a fair extent tested, as it has been used by some of the operators already. And based on some of the guidance, limited guidance that was received by the regulator, we have tailored the product a bit further in order to align it fully with what they wish to see as organization to that effect. And at the same time, the product has evolved also from just being a third-party account foundation in order to separate player funds for operators to being supporting the operators in providing all the relevant information in relation to their license application itself. So that's the description of the mechanics. It's the relevant documents they need to provide, but also making use of our network in relation to, for instance, a factual findings report that needs to be included. with the license application. So basically, we are fully equipped to support each and every operator in order to make available all the necessary and organize all the necessary for the application itself. And once the application has been filed and a license has been granted, to fully manage the third-party account foundation in order to separate player funds in light of the regulatory obligations.
Yeah. Great, quite interesting. Kees-Jan, thank you for sharing that with us. We have time for one audience question. Again, please use the Slido app to ask questions. There's the Q&A tab in the Slido app that allows you to do this. Let's see if there's anything in Slido. We have a question here. Why would we need an external supplier to set up a third-party funds foundation? Why an external supplier? Kees-Jan?
In essence, it's not required to have an external supplier in order to facilitate this solution. However, the solution, one of the key elements of the solution is the independence from the foundation and its officers from the operator as such, which in essence is somewhat of an issue, because where do you find the relevant people that can be the officers of the foundation? And it's actually quite a bit of a hassle to, first of all, set up and subsequently maintain the foundation in light of the regulatory obligation. And we have the experience nowadays that we can make sure that everything is being organized and facilitated for the operator in relation to this solution for separating the player funds. So it's basically off the plate of the operator. As Kester mentioned, we're part of the outsourcing of the operator as such, but we handle every aspect of the third-party account foundation without the operator having to worry about it.
Okay, that makes perfect sense. And thank you, Kees-Jan, for answering this question. If you'd like to know more about EM Group's solution for separating player funds, you can see here how to contact Kees-Jan. And again, it will also be included in the video that you will be sent shortly. Thank you, Kees-Jan. Have a great day. Next up, we have Max Irwin, Sales Manager at IDNow. Max, thank you for being here. How are you?
Very good. Thank you for the invite. Pleasure,
Max. And of course, we have yet another audience poll to give context to the topic of Max. In order to participate, again, please scan the QR code on your screen, visit slido.com, enter the event code GIH. At this time, our poll question is, as an operator, how quickly can you verify a customer's ID document? So as an operator, how quickly can you verify a customer's ID document? 24 hours is the main thing here. It depends, within minutes, within an hour, minutes, 14. I think we're stuck here between the depends and within 24 hours. Some interesting answers here. This brings us to the first question to Max. Max, to what extent is document verification optional in the Dutch iGaming market?
Yes, so I think document verification with other markets is perceived as a tool used for further due diligence or withdrawal. With the Dutch regulation, so the Fourth AML directive translated into Dutch law suggests that operators are to capture the document at registration, also to verify that document, but to verify that the person who is registering for the account is actually who they say they are. That involves obviously capturing either an image and then also doing some sort of liveness detection to check that the person is who they say they are. So yeah, that's the requirements. And also with that, they have to make sure they capture the image of the document to be able to provide that to authorities like the financial intelligence units, etc.
Quite clear. Some really helpful information here. Now that we've established that, you can't really operate without checking the document. And here, Max, what are the main benefits of your specific document verification solution?
Yeah, so the main benefits of IDNow, so I guess what I've just spoken about happens with AI technology. So we verify the document, we also then capture a selfie, and alongside that, we ask the user to move closer to the screen. That allows us to check for any pre-recorded documents. And that happens, which refers back to the question what we asked, that happens within 40 to 60 seconds. We are improving a lot of operators' player conversion rates by 25%, and that's what we're seeing as the reason for why operators come into us. On top of that, we're able to offer AML screening, so PEPs and sanctions screening and ongoing monitoring of that in that user flow. And on top of that, we also have manual review. So if there is any flagged fraudulent documents, it's also sent to one of our ident centers. There's 15 of those around Europe. And we then do additional checks and then obviously communicate this with the operator so they don't have to have additional resources in-house for that. So those are some of the benefits.
Okay, that's quite interesting, Max, and I'm sure that was new to some of the people in the audience here today. We've time for one audience question for Max. Let's see if there's anything in Slido. Again, you can use Slido for Q&A using the QR code or go to slido.com, etc. How easy or how hard is it, Max, to roll out your solution in multiple jurisdictions? So how difficult is it really?
So I guess the first part, rollout and integration is quick. It can happen in kind of weeks. We've done with operators. In terms of multi-jurisdiction, we support operators in highly regulated use cases like Germany as well, where we have video-based verification. On top of that, we are going into markets like Brazil ahead of regulation and Ontario. So yeah, fully multi-jurisdictional platform that has various different verification options, whether it be video, AI, manual, etc.
Sounds good. Thank you, Max, for answering this question. If you would like to know more about IDNow's products and services, you can see here how to contact Max. And again, you'll also see that in the video. Max, thank you for joining us today and have a fantastic rest of the day. Thank you.
Thank you.
Our next speaker today is Bryan Hill, digital media strategist at data center solutions provider Interxion, joining us from the UK. Bryan, good to have you with us. How are you?
I'm very well, thank you, Willem, and thank you for inviting us, and good afternoon to everyone on the call.
Great, thank you. As with all the other speakers, we'll kick off with an audience poll. In order to participate, I've said it 5 times now, but for those who tuned in later, please scan the QR code on your screen or visit slido.com and enter the event code GIH. As an operator about to launch into a new market, how high on your priority list, you at home, is choosing the right data center service provider? We're looking at some backdrop for the discussion here with Bryan. It seems important, Bryan, so that is good news. We'll get to it eventually. We have a very polite audience here today. Give it a few more seconds. And it's quite clear,
Willem,
so everybody knows it.
Yeah, I think, Willem, you and I were hoping this might be a little bit more controversial.
Exactly, but it doesn't seem to be, or we have a very polite audience here. But in any case, it brings us to the first question. Why should operators care about data center?
Yeah, I mean, I think the way that we look at it is, you know, we work with lots of the world's leading iGaming operators across the globe, yeah, but we start with their business challenges. We don't talk about data centers first. And the themes that we hear are, how do we deal with the fast changing regulatory environment? You know, how do we go into new markets quickly? How do we do it appropriately? How do we do it in compliance? And finally, and probably most importantly, how do we deliver the best kind of multi-channel experience for the customer and deliver the highest performance that's going to enable us to build, retain, and grow our customer base and keep churn low and do it cost effectively? Yeah. And we see that data centers are an important element in solving for many of these challenges, but not all data centers are the same. So we see the criteria that customers use as, you know, we'd like a global provider if possible that's going to be in the right locations so that when we want to go to those markets, we can go to them quickly. we need the highest quality data centers, resiliency, uptime, security, certifications like ISO 27001 and PCI DSS, but most importantly, access to the right connectivity providers and cloud providers that is going to provide that great quality of service to the customer. That's about reducing latency. That's about ensuring high quality experience that customers demand, and also ensuring that you're reducing those costs of providing that service to the customer.
Okay, well, thank you, Bryan. There's a lot of elements where operators should care about that. I think it's a great perspective. Let's go a little bit into detail with a second question to you. And that question is, what are some of the concerns raised by your existing iGaming customers, your operators, and how have you addressed those?
I don't know whether I would classify these as concerns as more as kind of questions that our customers raise, but they ask us, where are you now, but more importantly, where are you going in the future as well? We're investing billions of dollars in going to new places around the world. So they want to know where we're heading, because that's important for their planning, future planning, and their roadmap. So they're ahead of the curve. Obviously, we get a lot of the kind of detailed questions about, what's your connectivity proposition? What's the latency from here to there? On the technical side, we get questions now about increasing densities. That's, particularly with kind of leveraging more GPUs and AI and ML, whether that's in their own stack or hybrid clouds. They want to know how far we can push that, because they're doing lots more heavy data processing. We do get legal questions. We're not a legal company, but we do have a kind of partner of community providers, that can assist, whether that's, legal companies, managed service providers, data vault providers. So our customers, we facilitate those introductions. But most relevant, I think, for today's webinar is, why should I put my infrastructure stack in Amsterdam? Because under the regulations, of course, you can just put your control database in the Netherlands, and you can just put the rest of your stack in the EU. So that's perfectly viable. But however, as we've said, latency and performance for the customer, the end user, is a very important metric. Amsterdam is the third biggest connectivity metro in the whole of Europe. In Amsterdam, we have over 13 data centers, 210 connectivity providers, so the CDNs, the clouds, the carriers, the ISPs, that's going to enable that experience. And that increase in customer experience is one of the elements that's going to help differentiate one operator's service from another. And it's for that reason that we've already seen a number of iGaming operators deploy in Amsterdam already with us.
It all happens in Amsterdam. We know that. We have
the Netherlands is the most important, so we know that.
You emphasize that. Great. Thank you, Bryan. Kidding aside, we have time for one audience question. Let's see if we have something in Slido. Again, you can ask your question in Slido, point your camera at the QR code, go to the Q&A tab and ask the question. When you have question here, quick question, Bryan. Could you briefly outline your customer onboarding process?
Okay, so very briefly, there's the kind of specification of what a customer is going to need inside the data center. That kind of provides the kind of scope of works. It can take a few weeks, depending on what the customer wants to deploy, to maybe 2 or 3 months to get that customer operational. But once there is then a service transition where we kind of our team walks hand in hand with the technical personnel of the customer to ensure that every stage of the implementation goes correctly. And then there's a kind of handover to more of a service team that then actually walks through everything from delivery logistics to use of the customer portal to every single element. And then post kind of the customer going live, there are regular checking calls to make sure there are no issues, and if there are any questions, we respond to them very quickly. So it goes through a series of handoffs from one team to another with a central person that is always the customer's point of contact.
Great. That's quite clear, Bryan. Thank you for answering the question. Thank you for joining the webinar today. If you would like to contact Bryan, you can do so using his contact details that you see on the screen here, and you will also see this in the video that will be distributed tomorrow. Bryan, thank you for joining us, and see you soon.
Thank you, Willem.
Our final speaker of today is Antonio Zhangi, CEO of technical compliance solutions provider Maxima Compliance, also joining from London, I guess. Antonio, how are you?
Very good, thank you. Thank you for having us, Willem, today, and welcome to everyone on the call.
A pleasure. As with the other speakers, we will start with an audience poll. In order to participate, go to the QR code, participate in the poll, and that poll right now is from a technical perspective. What is the biggest obstacle in the Dutch remote gaming licensing process? So please take a moment to go to Slido. You can also do that in your browser, going to slido.com and use the event code GIH. And the poll question here is, and let's give it a few seconds because I think it's really important and interesting to hear the audience perspective here. From a technical perspective, what is the biggest obstacle in the Dutch remote gaming? So we have here a second with 40%, setting up the control database, and technical compliance as 50%. That brings us to Antonio here, and the first question. With this poll result in the background, Antonio, what is the Dutch regulator's approach to the technical compliance, or what are some of the main issues, as we just saw, that license applicants are confronted with?
I mean, it's hardly surprising that the audience responses actually sit within technical compliance and the control database. I mean, the Dutch approach, the KSA approach to the submissions has been very much an iterative process where in the initial submission phase, the license will include some basic information about, for example, system diagrams and general PAM platform compliance, as well as a description of the vault they will intend to use for the jurisdictions. But then, as the application progress, there is KSA testing that needs to be performed with the authority, not only with the KSA but also with the tax authority. And I think this is where the complexity starts, because obviously it is absolutely important that the documentation of the KSA, whether you're using a third-party supplier, whether you're using your own integrated platform, integrated data vault, then you'll be required to provide documentation that describes to the minimum detail the data model that has been used, or, for example, the type of mapping that has been used on a platform level to be able to ensure that the messaging is correct. So it is the regulator's approach is that reviews the documentation and then kind of progress and ask more questions, and in the events that your documentation is not in order, that becomes a real problem. I mean, you could see this, in fact, in the first wave of applications. I think when the first licenses were announced, the regulator had announced that the biggest problem that they found during the licensing process was technical compliance. So hardly surprising that this is what the audience is also perceiving.
Yeah, thank you for the analysis, Antonio, quite clear. That brings us also to the second question then, problem solution. How can Maxima Compliance assist in solving these issues that you just mentioned?
I mean, Maxima has been supporting many Dutch license holder now and applicants in all areas of technical compliance, namely the preparation of the system diagrams and documentation of the kind of systems, as well as the preparation of general change management and QMS, which are the key two things to be able to operate the businesses in a compliant manner. On top of that, as a data vault supplier, as a CDB supplier with Maxima Data Vault, we've been able to assist customers in effectively getting through the testing with the KSA in a super fast speed, simply because obviously we provide the solution, but we also provide consulting services. So basically, we are the only provider in the Netherlands that provides a full solution for technical compliance.
Quite clear and helpful information here from you, Antonio. Appreciate everybody staying within the allotted time today. We have time for one audience question, and look at Slido. What there is, please don't hesitate to go to Slido, as said before, either in your browser or in your app. And we have a question from the audience here about the control database. What distinguishes your control database solution from other ones currently available in the market? So the unique.
I mean, the answer here, I think, is pretty simple. I think the technology that we use make the integration substantially faster. So our model in the way the integration works makes time to market a lot faster. On top of that, we have JSON and XML API documentation, so both integrations are possible. On top of that, we have a console which no other suppliers have. This enables to have a specific country view as well as multiple jurisdictions view of the vault, and effectively enabling to see the total data from all suppliers that you have at any given point. But then the most important thing, as I was mentioning earlier, that unlike any other suppliers, we have a consulting firm attached to it, which effectively means not only we help you with the solution, but we also help you to implement all the work around it. So this is why it makes it effectively unique, a unique proposition.
That sounds like a unique proposition indeed. And if you'd like to know more about Maxima Compliance products and services, you can see here how to contact Antonio. And you will be able to review that later in the video that will be posted tomorrow as well. Antonio, thank you for joining us from London, and great to see you again.
Thank you.
With this, we've come to the end of this Gaming in Holland webinar. Magically in the allotted 45 minutes. I hope you find it useful. I would like to thank our speakers, Martijn, Antonio, Max, Kees-Jan, Kester and Bryan again, the whole Gaming in Holland team behind the scenes to set us up. And as I mentioned, a link to the full recording of today's webinar will be shared in a post-webinar email that we'll be sending out as soon as possible. As always, let's keep in touch. If you have not signed up yet, you can do so at the URL you see on the right bottom of the screen, www.gamingin.eu. So that's gamingin.eu. There you can subscribe to our magazines, newsletters, and receive information about our events. Let's stay in touch. Thank you for joining us today, and see you soon. Thank you.